a real honor to get to invite to the Bima for our sermon this morning, Don Akchin.
Shabbat Shalom. I always get a tingle of excitement, or more accurately, anxiety, when Parashat Korach rolls around, because it was 29 years ago on this Bima that my son gave his bar mitzvah speech on Korach's rebellion against Moses. And it was a speech that was notable for being the first time in recorded Jewish history that a speaker on the Bima sided with Korach over Moses. And I recall that there were a few tense moments of apprehension in the congregation as they waited to see if the bar mitzvah boy would be swallowed up by the earth. Happily, he was not. But I do think it is not a coincidence that since this day, as you can see for yourself, congregants at Beth Am have shown a great reluctance to sit in the front row. I come here neither to praise Korach nor to bury him, which would be redundant, but I do want to talk about how much more difficult it is in our day to settle arguments or to judge for ourselves who is right. Being swallowed up by the earth has a certain finality to it, an authority that is hard to argue with, unless, of course, you are the children of Israel, who immediately argued the next day that it was Moses' fault that hundreds of Korach supporters had died. Some things never change. But who are you going to believe, Moses or Korach? Easy for us to say because we know how the story ends. Also, let's not forget that the story we have read is clearly biased. It has been told from a pro-Moses slant. But I'd like you to try a thought experiment with me. Let's try to put ourselves in the place of the children of Israel in our tents in the desert as the story is unfolding, without the benefit of knowing how the story ends. And let's ask, who do you believe, Moses or Korach? So here's what you know. Moses and his brother Aaron managed to force Pharaoh's hand, and they've led the newly freed slaves out of bondage, and also, by the way, out of plentiful food and free housing, across a sea, miraculously, and into a barren desert. And Moses is giving all the credit to an invisible God with an unpronounceable name. He and Aaron disappear into a special tent from time to time where they say this God dwells. And they come out with orders, which they say come directly from this God. But what's their proof? And now here comes this fellow Korach. He's from a good family. Actually, he's a first cousin of Moses, a Levite. And he asks, why Moses? And why his brother Aaron? Isn't this nepotism? What makes them holier than thou? Aren't we all equal here? So why are these two self-appointed leaders more equal than others? So Korach gathers up 250 Israelites, men of repute, to join him, and he says to Moses and Aaron, quote, you have gone too far, for all the community are holy, all of them, and Adonai is in their midst. Why then do you raise yourselves above Adonai's congregation? And between the lines, Korach is also saying, why have you appointed your brother to be high priest? So we have two leaders, 2 points of view, 2 different versions of the facts. Sound familiar? If you are an Israelite listening to this dispute, knowing only what you have seen firsthand and heard firsthand, who do you believe? And how do you decide? We are fortunate there was another ancient who has some thinking that can shed some light on this problem. His name was Aristotle, and he recognized the power that words can have to persuade human beings to act. And recognizing that power, for better or for worse, he formulated a system for how people could persuade others of the truth. It was a simple 3-part formula. Logos, which is logic, the rationality of the argument. Pathos, which is the emotional state of the listener who is being influenced. And ethos, which is the character of the speaker. So let's try and apply Aristotle's rules of rhetoric to this dispute between Moses and Korach, starting with logos. Well, you have to admit, Korach's argument makes sense. All are holy. On the other hand, you have to admit that Moses has been uncannily accurate to this point. Everything that he said would happen has happened. He's got credibility. So that one's kind of a draw. Let's look at pathos. Korach's appeal that all are holy should appeal to the Israelites, sort of desert populism, if you will. And it's not that different from what Moses, quoting God, has said. The only point of difference is that Moses is setting up a hierarchy of a high priest and his attendants, Levites, one of whom is Korach, by the way. More on that in a second. And then we get to the third one, ethos, character. Moses has set himself up as God's official spokesman. But why? Is he exercising his leadership for his own glory or for the good of his people? He's humble. Actually, he even stutters. On the other hand, Korach is from a good family, same family as Moses. But what is Korach's motivation? Is it for the good of the people or for the good of Korach? Looking deeper, earlier in Bamidbar, we learned that Korach's family has been assigned to carry the vessels from the Mishkan whenever the Israelites move from one encampment to another. It's treated as a prestige position, but maybe Korach is not satisfied. Maybe he sees carrying the sacred vessels from place to place as scut work, while Moses and Aaron get all the glory. So Moses says to Korach directly, "Is it not enough for you that the God of Israel has set you apart from the community of Israel and given you direct access to perform the duties of Adonai's tabernacle and to minister to the community and to serve them? Now that Adonai advanced you and all your fellow Levites with you, do you not seek the priesthood too?" So in our thought experiment, if you're still with me, if you're standing in the desert encampment listening to Moses and Korach's battle of words, whom do you believe? Clearly from the story, we know what God thinks. When one side gets swallowed up by the earth, it's a pretty clear decision. But in our own day, when we cannot count on a convenient earthquake to decide the truth of one position or another, how do we decide? Do we trust in rational argument? Do we trust in the character of the proponents? Do we let ourselves be swayed by appeals to our emotions? I admit there is a great temptation, which I have fallen into more than once, to wash our hands of the whole matter and to say, both are right, which doesn't help making decisions, or to say, no one is right, which leads to trusting no one and nothing, and accepting nothing at face value. Perhaps that is an answer, but I don't think it's a good one, at least not in a democratic system where we, the people, are expected to make important decisions about our own present and future. So how is it possible to find common ground with others when you trust no one and take nothing at face value? It's not possible. And it's hard to look at a polarized America and not be worried that this is exactly where we are headed. When the rabbis of old studied the story of Korach, they concluded, not surprisingly, that Moses was right and God's punishment for Korach was just. In the Pirkei Avot we read, "Every dispute that is for the sake of heaven will in the end endure, but one that is not for the sake of heaven will not endure. Which is the controversy that is for the sake of heaven? Such was the controversy of Hillel and Shammai. And which is the controversy that is not for the sake of heaven? Such was the controversy of Korach and all his congregation." Our challenge today is twofold. One is to decide in our own minds, without benefit of earthquakes, which disputes are honest disputes for the sake of heaven, and which are disputes built on deceit, sleight of hand, false promises, delusions, or facts that are not fact. The second is to be discerning without becoming cynical, without distrusting all advocates, without assuming that there is always a hidden agenda. Can we listen carefully to both Moses and Korach with open minds and hearts? can we in fact distinguish who is Korach and who is Moses? Shabbat Shalom.